Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. As the mom of a bunch of really active kids, when we started homeschooling, read-alouds never seemed to me like they were going to be in the picture. I could never imagine how I would get my children to sit still long enough for me to read to them each and every day. Now, I have to say that years later, read-aloud time is our favorite time of the day. And it is something that I make sure we do fit into each and every homeschool day because it is such a foundational part of what we do. This has taken lots of trial and error. It's taken lots of practice. But I think that we've got it down now that it is something that we are all comfortable with, and it's something that is just creating great memories for my kids for when they get older. So today I'm going to hope to help you by giving you some tips on when your wiggle worm won't sit still for read-alouds. Okay, now first of all, I want to point out that all kids are different, so these tips that I give you might be a huge help to you, and some of them might not help you at all. I'm just hoping to give you enough ideas that you can at least do that trial and error thing that I did. See what works, what doesn't, and see if you can in some way integrate this really fun and relaxing routine into your homeschool. Now, first of all, when it comes to read-alouds, one thing that I really have to point out is when a lot of people think of read-alouds, a lot of people who have never done them before, I think that they often imagine families sitting together and just reading for really long periods of time and reading classic books. And I'm going to tell you that that's not always the case. Sure, there are families who do that, but I'm willing to bet that it is something that they had to work up to, and it is not something that they started out right from the get-go doing. And that is, you know, again, it's the first thing I want to talk to you about, is you really have to just formulate it to fit your kids. If you know that your kids are wiggle worms, don't plan on reading to them for a really extended period of time. Depending on your child's age and on their ability or on the length of time that they can comfortably sit for, even if you only start out reading to them for 5 minutes a day, is more than what you have been reading to them if you've never been doing read-alouds with them at all. And, you know, that is something that I myself had to realize. I did try to jump in and start reading long chapters to my kids, and it didn't work out. You know, at first it was something that the kids weren't looking forward to because they just didn't want to sit for that long. That's not how God wired them to be. And I learned that eventually. So that is something that is really important for you. And I have to say that even now, my kids are, you know, older. I don't have toddlers anymore or anything, but even for my middles group, for my kids who are, you know, from 8 to 13 years old, even when I read to them, I will not read them more than 20 pages at a time. 20 pages, if you count in narration when we do it, usually comes up to about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how long their narration time is. If we do a straight reading without doing narration, we don't do narration every day, 20 pages will usually work out to about 20 to 30 minutes of reading. If I try to go chapter by chapter, but if we come to a chapter that is more than 20 pages, I cut it in half because I realize that my kids are not going to pay attention if I try to make them sit that long. And that is something that is really important, that you integrate that into your way of thinking. You don't have to cover an entire chapter if you know that your kids aren't going to pay attention to it. Just find a good break and stop there and continue on the next day. You're still going to reap the full benefits of read-alouds, and I guarantee that if this is something that you are diligent with, and if you work it into a routine and you work with it every day, that time limit will be extended and your kids will be able to eventually sit for longer periods of time. So the second tip that I want to give you is just to let your kids have a say in what you're reading aloud to them. Yes, sometimes as the homeschooling parent, you can choose the book. I choose the book for my kids sometimes, but there are other times that I will either ask them if they have any ideas of books that they would like me to read, or I might give them a choice of like 3 to 5 books and they can vote on which one they want me to read. But if you make sure that you are reading books to your kids that they have a genuine interest in, you know that that is going to make them listen to it all that much easier. So it's not really anything difficult to think about. Kids pay attention when they're interested. So yes, after you've been reading for your kids aloud for a while, and after they are able to sit through longer bits of reading and are able to concentrate a little bit more, yes, you can occasionally work in some classics or some books that you think your kids might enjoy or would be good for them to read. But if you're just starting out, really try to stick to those books that you know your kids definitely would want to hear. So the third tip that I have for you is just to keep in mind that just because one family absolutely loves a book for read aloud does not mean that your family is going to. And this is another one that I had to really learn on my own. Because, for example, I heard so many good things about the book Redwall, or is it a series? I don't even know, because my kids wouldn't let me get past like the first chapter. Just no interest in Redwall at all. And I was astounded because all I heard were great things about these families who were reading Redwall, and it was just fantastic. And my kids, nope, they wanted nothing to do with it. Same with The Princess and, is it The Princess and the Goblin? That's another book. It's a classic, and I heard lots of people going on and on about how much their kids loved it. It was a fantastic read. They had such a great time together reading it. I made my kids sit through about halfway of The Princess and the Goblin, and eventually I realized that nope, this just wasn't going to work. No matter how hard I tried, they just were not gaining interest as the story went along. And so it's something that I didn't want to stop reading it. I really didn't, because I just kept thinking, why don't my kids like this when so many other people do? But it's because I was not realizing that my kids don't have to be like all the other kids. Every child is different. Every adult is different. And that is okay, because the world would be a really boring place if we all were exactly the same. So another tip that I have for you is, if your kids rooch around a lot while you're reading to them, you might want to give them something quiet to do with their hands. Now, first of all, I want to point out that I wouldn't give them something to do with their hands that is going to require too much thought. For example, I used to let my kids play with Shopkins as I was reading to them, until I realized that when they were playing with their Shopkins, they were also in their head doing all sorts of scenarios with their Shopkins and having them do little silent dialogues with one another and everything. So what happened was my read aloud was just like white noise to them, and they weren't actually listening to what I was saying, because as they were playing with their Shopkins, they were having their own little imaginary playtime going on. So if you want to give your kids something to do with their hands, I would suggest something, something like Silly Putty or something like slime. My kids are big on slime lately. They're constantly making it, constantly mashing it with their hands and mixing things into it. Just something that can keep their hands moving. I would like to point out though, and this is also going to go through with the next tip too, these two go together. I would really caution you to just pay attention to if your kids can play with something with their hands and listen at the same time. Because what I have found with my own kids, that some of my kids are perfectly fine moving their hands around and doing things with their hands, and they're still listening and comprehending what I'm reading. But I have other children that they really just have to be completely focused on me, because if I give them even something as simple as playing with slime, they just focus on that and they can't listen. So if you want to try it out, one thing that I would ask is, or one thing that I would suggest is, after you're done reading, if you would say to your kids, what was your favorite part that I read about today? Or, so can you tell me back what I read about today? Or ask them some sort of casual question to kind of get an idea of whether or not this is a good idea for them. So yeah, so this again is linked to the next tip, which is maybe to ask your kids to draw as you are reading, to draw a scene of something that you are reading to them. And that's one thing that I tell my kids. If you are going to draw, it has to be a scene of something that I'm reading about, because I know that if they're drawing a scene, they're listening. It could even be, at one point, I was reading a book to my kids and I was printing off coloring pages that had to do with that book. But I really like the idea of doing the illustration better, because again, it just shows that they're taking in what it is that you're reading. Same thing though as with the other tip about doing something with their hands. Sometimes they might get so focused on drawing that picture that they might not hear the rest of what you're reading, because they become so absorbed in getting that scene right. So again, that is something that you really have to gauge each individual child and see if they can draw and listen at the same time. And that's why I told you at the very beginning, not all of these tips will work for everybody. I'm just hoping to give you some ideas of things that you can do to maybe get a simpler read aloud time. Again, if you have active kids like I do, I have lots of active kids. Out of all of my kids, I only have maybe 2 or 3 kids who are not active. So that means I've got like 8 or 9 really active kids. Even my 25-year-old son is still extremely active. But anyway, now the last tip that I have for you today is to find books that have a movie that go with them. And you could use that movie as an incentive for reading the book. You could tell them, hey, you know what, guys? We're going to read this book, and then after we're done, we're going to watch the movie, and we're going to see if it's anything at all like the book. And so, yeah, of course, you would want to do it with a book and a movie that your kids haven't seen yet. That's probably the best way to get them to pay attention. But on the other hand, if you know that your kids really love a movie that has a book that you've never read, that might also be an incentive for them to want to hear the book, because they already love the movie. They already have, a basic idea of what it's about. So they might be interested in reading that book. And you might find yourself getting stopped every now and then. Hey, that wasn't in the movie, but that's good. Those are the things that you want to hear, because that's a clue that they're listening, they're comprehending, and it's working. So, and one last idea, saying it goes right in with the movies. If you don't want to wait until after you finished the book to watch the movie, you could always watch the movie first, and then you could read the book afterwards, again, to make comparisons, to see how close they were, and so on. But that's something that we like to do, and we've had so many discussions on, differences in the movies. Like Percy Jackson is one. The movie, nothing like the book. Really, really way off. Johnny Tremaine, when I read that with my high schoolers last year and then we watched the movie, they noticed some differences. So again, that's just a good sign. If they notice differences, it's a good sign, because they're listening. So anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below, unless YouTube still has my comments disabled, in which case you can always head over to my Instagram page and you can leave a comment on any of my posts there. Anything at all that has to do with the videos, any questions that you have, it's fine, because you have to be able to get in touch with me somewhere, right? Instagram is the best place to do it if my comments are still disabled. And also, if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page and see what rewards I have for my patrons there, I will also leave that link below, and I hope you have a great day.